The Gestapo had a 5 million franc bounty on her head. They called her the White Mouse, because no matter how many traps they set, she always slipped away. Nancy Wake started as a wealthy socialite in 1930s Paris, living a life of champagne and parties. But when the Nazis invaded France, this party girl became their worst nightmare. She smuggled over 1,000 Allied soldiers and airmen to safety right under German noses. The Gestapo put up wanted posters all over France, their most wanted person. When they finally discovered her network, they captured her husband. He protected her secret to the end. Nancy escaped with minutes to spare, but she didn't run home to safety. She parachuted back into France to hunt Nazis. Leading 7,000 French resistance fighters, she became a ghost the Germans couldn't catch. Once, when her radio codes were destroyed in a Gestapo raid, Nancy bicycled over 300 miles through enemy checkpoints in 72 hours to get replacement codes and restore contact with London. When she encountered an SS sentry who could alert the entire garrison, she took him down in hand-to-hand combat. Completely silent, no weapons, just her bare hands. The Gestapo never caught the White Mouse. By war's end, she had more combat medals than almost any woman in history. What would you risk everything for, even if it cost you everyone you loved? The Gestapo called her the most dangerous Allied agent in France and plastered wanted posters across the South, a woman with a limp. That limp came from a wooden leg she called Cuthbert. Virginia Hall ran resistance networks right under their noses. Pilots were rescued before interrogation. Sabotage hit targets requiring inside intelligence. Her cells were unbreakable, and it was driving the Germans insane. Then an informant sold her out. She had hours to disappear. Most would have run for the coast and a waiting plane. Virginia walked straight into the Pyrenees in winter with a prosthetic leg made of wood and metal. 35 miles through snow over 2 days, while German patrols swept the valleys below. Any sane person would have stayed safe and called it survival. 6 months later, she crossed back into occupied France disguised as an elderly peasant woman selling cheese at country markets. Gray hair, stooped back, still limping, but now she looked like someone the war had already broken. The Gestapo walked right past her at checkpoints. While they searched for the spy from Lyon, she trained sabotage teams in barns and coordinated attacks that crippled German supply lines before D-Day. She was always right there in front of them. The Americans gave her the Distinguished Service Cross in a room with no cameras. She became one of the CIA's first female officers, retiring to a quiet farmhouse where she never spoke of the war. The Gestapo's most wanted spy died quietly in 1982. Most of her neighbors never knew. She had 48 hours to save 3 men from the Gestapo. Her own government didn't even trust her. August 1944. The Gestapo captured Francis Kammertz and 2 other Allied agents, all 3 sentenced to the ultimate penalty. Christine Granville was 60 miles away when she got the news. She hated bicycles, but she climbed on one anyway and rode 25 miles to the prison in Digne. Her own commanders thought she was too flamboyant to work undercover, so she walked straight into Gestapo headquarters and told them she was a British spy. She claimed to be the prisoner's wife and General Montgomery's niece. Then she offered 2 million francs she didn't have. That night she convinced London to airdrop the cash. They did, barely. Some in British intelligence still suspected she was working both sides. August 17th. She walked back into Gestapo headquarters with 2 million francs in hand. For 3 hours, she faced down Max Wham, the SS officer who could order their release. The Allies were 40 miles out and closing fast. She showed him broken transmitter parts, claiming constant contact with Allied forces. "If anything happens to them," she said, "you'll answer to me personally when the British arrive." That evening, Wham marched the 3 prisoners out. They thought this was the end. Instead, he drove them to where Christine was waiting. They all walked out alive. Churchill called her his favorite spy. Britain rewarded her with a medal, then fired her with 1 month's pay. Drop a comment if you want more forgotten heroes. Italy's most famous athlete was smuggling secrets past Nazi soldiers, and they had no idea. Gino Bartali was a national hero, Tour de France winner, Mussolini's favorite. Nazi officers asked for his autograph. What they didn't know, every training ride was a mission. Bartali cycled hundreds of kilometers through checkpoints carrying forged documents concealed in his bicycle, fake identity papers for Jewish families trying to escape. When fascist police stopped him and questioned his bicycle, Bartali would insist the frame was precisely calibrated for racing and they would ruin it. They believed him. He was famous. For 2 years, he transported papers across Italy while sheltering a Jewish family in his own cellar. Historians estimate he helped save hundreds of Jewish lives. After the war, Bartali never spoke about it publicly. He refused every interview, every award. When his son finally asked him about the war years, Bartali said, "Good is something you do, not something you talk about. Some medals are pinned to your soul, not your jacket." He died in 2000. Only when researchers opened resistance archives did the world learn the truth. Francis Pegahmagabow, an Ojibwe soldier, crouched in the crater with his message pouch strapped across his chest. He had his orders. Cross 400 yards of open ground. He looked at the bodies scattered across no man's land. Then he stood up. He ran low through the mud. Shells exploded overhead. A bullet screamed past his ear. He hit the ground as a shell landed where he'd been standing. Got up. Kept moving. He couldn't outrun sound. Couldn't outthink shrapnel. But he knew the rhythm now. The pause between impacts. The pattern in the chaos. He dove. Crawled. He didn't stop. He threw himself over the sandbags and handed the dispatch to the officer. Mission complete. Pegahmagabow turned around and ran back. He would do this again and again across 3 years of war. They gave him medals when it was over, but the soldiers beside him knew his worth long before anyone pinned metal to his chest. One soldier used German trucks to save 300 lives, then paid the ultimate price. Anton Schmid was an electrician from Vienna. In 1941, he was drafted and given a boring desk job. But from his window, he watched as Jewish families were dragged through the streets. Thousands were forced to the meadows outside the city. They never came back. Most men looked away. Schmid couldn't. He started forging work papers, calling people essential workers to save them. Then he got bolder. He hid a Jewish couple in his own apartment for months. He stole Wehrmacht trucks and drove nearly 300 Jewish refugees to safer cities, lying to commanders about moving laborers. He gave one man the identity papers of a deceased soldier, a complete new life. When the resistance warned him he'd be caught, Schmid said, "We all must go sometime, but if I can choose how, I choose to go as a helper, not as a destroyer." Eventually, they arrested him. At his court-martial, his attorney offered him a way out. Just say you needed workers for the war effort. One lie, and he'd survive. Schmid refused. He stood up and said, "I was saving lives. That's all I ever tried to do." A German fighter pilot had an American bomber in his crosshairs. What he did next changed both their lives forever. December 1943. 21-year-old Charlie Brown's B-17 bomber limped through German skies after bombing Bremen. Engines destroyed, half the crew wounded. The crippled bomber fell behind, alone and defenseless. 28-year-old Franz Stigler was refueling when Brown's damaged bomber flew over his airfield. One more victory would earn him the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest honor. He took off fast. Stigler pulled alongside the shattered bomber and looked inside. Wounded teenagers, trying to keep each other alive. This wasn't a threat. This was a flying coffin. His commander's words echoed, "Fight by rules that keep your humanity." Stigler made a choice that could cost him everything, including his life. He flew wingtip to wingtip, shielding the bomber from ground fire, guiding them toward the North Sea. At the coast, Stigler saluted and turned away. On Christmas Eve 1914, Captain Robert Miles witnessed something his commanders desperately wanted buried. German soldiers shouted, "Merry Christmas, Englishmen," across no man's land. Without permission, men from both sides laid down their rifles and walked into the frozen wasteland between trenches. They shook hands, exchanged gifts, and sang carols together. Miles wrote home calling it, quite unauthorized but perfectly understood, the most extraordinary Christmas imaginable. But military high command had forbidden any contact with the enemy. Officers who allowed fraternization faced being court-martialed for what was labeled treason. 5 days after Christmas, Captain Miles was killed in action. His father did something dangerous. He published Robert's letter in the Daily Mail in January 1915, defying military censors actively suppressing the story. They feared soldiers might refuse to fight if they knew their enemies were just men like them. Miles's letter became one of the few accounts that survived the cover-up, preserving a moment of humanity the war machine tried to erase.